Okay. New time outlines. Haven't done this for a while. Everything has changed. Got it. Just take a quick screenshot of that. The idea was to play the relevant parts of the podcast, the Gript podcast, where they outline a scenario. Testing. Yeah, it appears that I've got some volume. Let's see with
Dwyer. I know we said there would be no show this week as we will be away.
What action might be, whether or not...
Is that so certain? It doesn't have to be that. Gale can play this. Simon Harris, what he's likely to do when he comes in, how difficult he'll be to predict, and some of the different views that are being put forward as to when he should hold the election, because it will ultimately be his choice. Well, once he's voted in as Taoiseach, it's his choice. And a couple of people asked, well, you described it as a coronation. You said it was just going to happen, but is that so certain? It doesn't have to be that certain. Talk about how Fine Gael can play this to their advantage. But Michael, I think, yes, let us talk about how Fianna Fáil could play this to their advantage, while also listing to proviso that under Martin, they won't.
I would say under Martin, they won't. The question will be, to what extent Martin matters? To what extent Micheál might have come to the end of a certain kind of road? I think this is also happening, let's face it, Gary, in the consequence that we have become aware that some Fianna Fáilers, whatever their ultimate action might be, whether or not they decide to demonstrate a testicular fortitude, which had previously been absent, have been looking at the numbers and have worked out certain things. Now, I would say the first thing we should point out is, and this is, I think, fairly widely accepted, that within the broad sweep of the parliamentary party, there is somewhere between a mixture of discomfort, embarrassment, and pure mule shame that, having previously brought down the government on the basis of a confidence motion resulting from the incompetence of the health minister, then known as Simon Harris, they're now going to go through the lobbies not that much time later and say, okay, we don't think that he was doing a great job as Minister for Health. In fact, he's done such a bad job as Minister of Health, we're going to take the government down. Now we're going to vote for him to be Taoiseach, because we think he's come along, he's learned a lot of lessons, he's such a good guy. Fine Gael have nobody else who wants or can be leader, so he's going to be leader, and that's the real reason we have to vote for him. And we're going to vote for him on that basis. And that is generating a real sense of kind of discomfort, a lot of shifting in chairs, a lot of not maintaining eye contact when asked this kind of question. So that's the departure point. Then the numbers come in, Gary.
And the numbers are pretty brutal. That's the wonderful thing about numbers, Michael. They're the essence of politics. When Fine Gael came out saying some very unfriendly things about Georgia Maloney, we said they probably shouldn't say those, because looking ahead, Maloney's party, the ECR, is likely to be a very important part of the EPP's plans for the future of the European Parliament. And given the Fine Gael are in the EPP, saying nasty things about them now could mean in a year you're having to go, well, I said they were fascists then, but actually in review, they're quite lovely people, perfectly capable of governing with us.
And the funny thing, the very funny thing about that is that right now, from word circulating around that centrifuge of information that is Brussels, the Georgia Maloney's party turns out is actually far more important to the EPP potentially than Fine Gael is, because Fine Gael is not at the moment being seen in the highest of regard and the best of orders by a number of people in the EPP. They don't seem to think that they're very Christian Democrat at all, even though, of course, they are Christian Democrat because somebody told us they were, and they're members of the EPP, so they must be. So it's a funny old way the way that history works.
A couple of Fianna Fáilers have talked about what I think is actually the best strategic play here, but they're only talking about it individually because at the leadership level, it's just not going to happen. It's too, I was going to say avant-garde, but no, it's not avant-garde. It's just a bit too much will to do it. than Martin has shown. And I suppose before we get into what they're actually talking about, very, very quietly, and with absolutely no indication that they'll actually do it, because to not be unkind to Fianna Fáil, Michael, but if I actually said, it's like, I would like to run the full term. That is my intention.
Okay, but even before we get there, just to clarify, because I think a lot of people don't understand quite how it is. There are 160 TDs in the Dáil. The government has 80. The opposition has 79. So it is actually, even though nothing has ever felt like a moment of crisis, the way that regularly in the last number of years Tory governments did, which had much bigger majorities because there was the fear of a backbench parade. But it's the numbers that create the opportunity, or indeed the problem, because as it stands, all but I think one of the independents, who constitutes a large part of the opposition, have said that they are going to vote against Harris, right? Now, obviously, all the other parties, like the People Before Profit, Sinn Féin, the Labour Party, Social Democrats, etc., won't vote for him. So the numbers are there that mean it doesn't even have to be a party. It doesn't have to be the party. Just has to be a few brave, solitary souls ploughing their own furrow, Gary, following their own consciences. And poor old Simon gets the shaft. So, so what is the prospect? Why might some of these brave souls? You're saying Simon is following. Well, he doesn't actually have to do anything, does he? But because it's very hard for him to do anything within this time frame.
Yeah, so Simon will get some level of bounce just from being a new person, cleans out the cabinet. Simon Coveney is gone. Simon Coveney has graciously left the stage before being pushed.
Okay.
Helen McEntee looks like she's out of justice, because if you're going to run and you as you said, Michael, you're not going to have a lot of time. You're going to have to do things that make people feel you are taking something seriously.
Yes.
And Helen McEntee in justice is not that. That's just not it.
Just not.
So he will have something from that. There are a couple of large things they could do, which would have an impact, mostly on just giving a sense of what the government is and getting them into a position where they can go for election and drive themselves up from where they are now by going into that Sinn Féin independent pool, maybe drawing back some disaffected Fine Gaelers who are disappointed with Varadkar. The problem then is from the perspective of Fianna Fáil, what that creates for you. Micheál Martin is not an agent of growth. Micheál Martin is an agent of managed decline. So maybe you go up, most likely you don't. It's hard to see what new thing Micheál Martin is going to do that could lift you up other than the party coming up in the polls just because the government, as in Fine Gael, starts doing better.
Yeah.
So there's no real advantage to Fianna Fáil to have this run on other than just a vague hope that Fine Gael drags you up with them. So a Harris Taoiseach, I think, is very dangerous to Fianna Fáil. If he can properly embed, if he can properly represent things, then he can draw, I think, a lot of people who would have been traditionally Fianna Fáil votes, which creates an interesting situation where probably the best move for Fianna Fáil as a party, as opposed to a vehicle for Micheál Martin, is to take out Harris at the vote, to refuse to allow him to become Taoiseach on the basis that he's incompetent, and that he's so incompetent he brought down the last government, and that you'd be damned if you're going to do it again.
Yeah, and I think again there's a point worth making, just a slightly technical point about the numbers. If we allow at the moment that Fine Gael are running, we'd call it 20%, right? Imagine the Fine Gael are running at 20% of the polls, and Fianna Fáil are running at 16%. Now, even in the face of those numbers where Fine Gael are ahead, a little bit ahead of Fianna Fáil, right? There is within Fine Gael right now, and has been for a while, a kind of a sense of doom that outside of Dublin that they were just going to get murdified. We have said before that's a possibility. That's a real possibility. They have been tied to a lot of the green policies, which are outside of the cities are seen as being anti-country, anti-agriculture. And therefore, potentially, even though Fianna Fáil might do slightly worse, because they have the incumbents and Fine Gael lack the incumbents, that'll lead to a depressing effect in the vote. That in the end, it could end up the Fine Gaelers being eliminated will end up voting Fianna Fáilers who might in other circumstances not be elected. If we get a Harris bounce, Gary, right? Say he comes out and he says all sorts of lovely things. For example, I am confidently expecting we will hear some very strong language about crime.
We've already started to hear some very strong language about crime. And it's strongly suspected that at the Ardèche that's happening this weekend, there's going to be further announcements on crime. They've clearly recognised it as an issue they're weak in.
We're hearing words about building a prison, Gary.
Things that sound like perhaps people shouldn't be getting bail. Like out there stuff.
It's old-fashioned Fine Gael law and order stuff, which I think there's a hunger for. I think
together, ensure that this government remains solid and stayed the course, and I think will be a model for future coalitions of equals in this state and elsewhere. And I want to thank the civil and public service for their commitment to the state. They might not put themselves on the ballot papers in the way politicians do, but they do put public service first. And
I think we're going to start hearing all sorts of new language about borders and migration. We may even see the odd large plane being chartered and some young men from Georgia being advised the time has come back to go back to Georgia. So there are things he can do that will be performative, but will send a message. A message I think that there's going to be a considerable appetite for. So, and on top of that, they'll get a buzz. The problem for Fianna Fáil is that if that gap between the two starts to really grow, then instead of being Fianna Fáil benefiting from a problem that Fine Gael is experiencing at the local level, say because of incumbency or whatever, if that gap starts to grow and the Fine Gaelers, because even if every election is local, if there's a strong wind blowing at a national level, it's very hard to resist it. So if Fine Gael starts to do better and start to widen that gap, that means that the Fine Gaelers are going to be the ones who are going to be ahead on the first preference, and it'll be the Fianna Fáilers who are going to be staring down the barrel of elimination to elect the Fine Gaelers. And there are a lot of guys out there whose seats are far from safe. I mean, they're okay, but they're not doing brilliant. And what they are going to be asked to do, it seems to me, Gary, is simply this. They're being told, okay, we're going to be the responsible people. We're going to make sure that this government continues all the way down to the end. But there's two things, Gary, what are there not? First of all the way down to the end is probably not much more than 7 months. And what guarantee do they have in Fianna Fáil that Harris doesn't throw in a month of pyrotechnics and then goes and runs for the country? Maybe. I mean, it seems bizarre to me. You I think it's more possible than I do. But goes for the country in June. What does that do for Fianna Fáil? Or more to the point, for the Fianna Fáil TD, who doesn't really give a damn about what Micheál Martin does or doesn't, but he wants to keep his seat.
Here's what I would say on that, on whether or not I think it's more likely. Harris is very difficult to predict. I think his incentives have changed now. He's Taoiseach. I don't think you can go on a lot of his past behaviour. I know certain parties are advising him that is what he should do. And to be honest, if I was advising him myself, that is probably what I would advise him to do. To go in, make some broad spectacle, to use the fact that so many of your TDs are not sitting, to hide the fact that you are starting to very aggressively go through selection processes and pushing new candidates out all across the country.
Yeah.
to basically try and mitigate the fact that you're going to have a bad day because so many of your people aren't running again. Keep it going, say the right words, and then at the smallest amount of distance that you legally have to notify people, pull the election out from under them, basically to bring them down and to ameliorate some of your issues. So that's 3 weeks. So the thing there is that if Harris listens to the people who are saying that, and he's capable of it, Fianna Fáil will not know a moment of peace until the actual election, because he can do it at any time. He can just go to the president and seek the dissolution of the government.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said he's and the core of that is he is unpredictable. I don't think that they really will have a strong sense of this man to any great degree more than the people outside. I think that he's going to be unpredictable, and that's going to be deeply uncomfortable for them.
No, I mean, then you also have, if we look at Sinn Féin, in the week since the referendum, Sinn Féin has come out and said it will not run the referendum again, despite the fact it said so. It has come out against the hate speech laws. It has come out against the EU Migration Pact on the ground of national sovereignty. There was talk of repatriating failed asylum seekers. Now, they did that in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
Because they obviously looked at that and went, we were told that was going to be popular. The people who told us that was going to be popular, what else have they told us was going to be popular?
Sinn Féin have been learning all sorts of new words. I mean, it's impressive language apprehension.
But that's the other thing, and this affects both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. Sinn Féin are well organised and they're willing to make these movements. If they think something is unpopular, they will go against it. So Sinn Féin are on a downswing now from the heights they had gotten. If you give Sinn Féin 7 months, do you really believe they're not going to try and improve that and that they don't have the capability to do that? So then if you're advising Harris, it's like, no, do it now. Do not give them time to get better. The problem there is that Fianna Fáil, if that is what Harris does, Fianna Fáil will then go into the election, having allowed Harris to strengthen themselves, to get people in to replace some of the people they're going to lose, having chosen the moment explicitly that he thinks is beneficial to him, which will not be the moment that's beneficial to Fianna Fáil, and where you have just voted him in as Taoiseach.
Yeah, you voted him in as Taoiseach, and the only excuse you have for doing that is your desire for stability and to make sure that this government goes to the full extent of its term. You do that, and then bang, 2 months later, he's called an election. You look like a double Egypt. You're an Egypt for voting for the man that you said was incompetent to be a minister and therefore brought the government down. And you're an Egypt because you said the government was going to last the full of its term and go into March. And here you are in June of the previous year, and you're getting an election because you didn't realize this man was going to do it. It's not a good look. And we know that there are a number of TDs out there who are looking at this. Also, there are a number of TDs out there who are just, frankly, cranky and pissed off and fed up with Martin and fed up with managed decline and fed up with the idea that they have to be a fundamentally centre-left progressive party which disrespects and dislikes its own membership in a desperate attempt to get Social Democrats to vote for them, who will never vote for them, Gary. And they're thinking, you know what? let's just bring this debacle to an end. But the point you made, I absolutely agree. And this is the point I've been made for a long time. Sinn Féin, two things. First of all, you cannot assume that Sinn Féin are going to keep going down. I absolutely don't think that they will. They may trend down for another little while. But yes, you're right. They have shown a capacity to turn around, to recognise where politically they've got things wrong, where their voters are not, and they are, and they're going to rectify that. So if that capacity means, to me, strongly indicates that they're going to stabilise. And maybe not just stabilise. Secondly, even those votes that they have lost, when a lot of the commentators are talking about that, Gary, as if those votes are gone away forever. They were up at 36, 37%. Now they're down to 25%, right? So that's, say, a 12% loss. But those votes aren't lost. If the election happens and there is no other alternative, a lot of those former Sinn Féin voters will become Sinn Féin voters again, because that's what they'll go back to. They want to vote for someone, and they'll go back to Sinn Féin, maybe grudgingly, but it doesn't matter if they end up voting for them. So if you can get Sinn Féin when they're still a little bit destabilised, when they still have a bit of a problem, when they're still potentially a downswing, that would seem to me to be the single strongest argument for going. Why give them time to reassess, to stabilise, and then to eventually, potentially start going forward again?
No, and what is interesting here is that Sinn Féin have changed. Fine Gael will now have changed. Harris is saying different things. The only people who haven't seemed to react to the referendum defeat at all, or had any period of reflection, are the Greens and Fianna Fáil. And frankly, it doesn't really matter to the Greens because their voters fell a particular way. But if you remember, Michael, what we saw from some of the polling there, Fianna Fáil voters did not.
Sound advice that you gave on those occasions when it was required.
On the nominations for Taoiseach shall, if not previously concluded, be brought to a conclusion after 1 hour and 42 minutes, and the following arrangements shall apply. The debate shall be confined to a single round, and the arrangements shall be as follows. Speeches of a government proposer and seconder shall not exceed 5 minutes. The speeches by representatives of other government parties, Sinn Féin, the Labour Party, Social Democrats, People Before Profit Solidarity, the Regional Group, the Rural Independent Group and the Independent Group shall not exceed 10 minutes per party or group. Contributions by non-aligned members shall not exceed 2 minutes, and members may share time. On the nomination of a Taoiseach for appointment by the President, the Dáil shall, unless it otherwise orders, stand suspended until either 5 p.m. or 4 hours after the conclusion of the proceedings, whichever is the later. And other than on this usual business, this business proposal, any divisions claimed this week shall be taken by roll call.
Thank you, Chief Whip. Is the proposed business for the week agreed? Deputy Pádraig McLaughlin and then Deputy Boyd Barrett. Yeah.
John Cooler, it's very clear that when Taoiseach Leo Varadkar went out to the park last night, we should have been going to the country today. The people should decide on who our next Taoiseach is, not the assembled numbers here in government. The people should have their say. This should not be happening today. We should have gone to the country. So we do not agree to your schedule.
Now, come here. Listen, the whole country is looking in. Can we please behave with a bit of decorum? Deputy Boyd Barrett.
The business facing the country and the issues facing the country have been effectively driven off the agenda for the rest of the week. And that, to me, is unacceptable. That
improve their life. In 2009, he was elected to Wicklow County Council with over 32% of the vote at the age of 22, a record at that time. And at the age of 24 in 2011, he was elected to this House, Dáil Éireann. Simon quickly displayed the attributes that is needed to be a minister. Time when our country, from that period since 2016, met its most major challenges. In the space of 6 years, a global pandemic, Brexit, the first war in mainland Europe in a generation, a sharp cost of living crisis. Each one of those events is a once-in-a-generational type event. Yet they all came to our shores in the space of 6 years. And Simon Harris was part of that team, along with our outgoing Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, who managed that process, who managed Ireland at a very difficult